If you are in a place where you can take risk, even if you have a huge expense line and things like this, just look at how long you have to go and then try it.
Kara Nortman is a managing partner of Monarch Collective, and she's the co-founder of Angel City Football Club. She also started All Raise, a movement to change the landscape of women in venture capital.
What I discovered in the early days of being curious about women's sports was that I had something to offer that was valued. I wasn't going to be paid for it, but it gave me joy. I think we're in a stage of life where we all just want more and more and more. Something better or something you're missing out on is being marketed to you on social media. And I actually think what we want is...
I'm sure this is also a journey of rejections and hardship and doubts. What made it a success?
My husband said to me last night, he's like, you realize you're in the rejection business. Like, you get so much rejection. And I'm like, you're right. But I love getting rejection around our fund because...
Kara, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Ilana. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be so fun. But first of all, I have to ask, women's sports, like, how is that became a bug for you? Like, how did you even decide to go for that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll back it up and say, one of the reasons we call it Monarch, and I won't go through the whole story right now, is following your energy and serendipity. And I very much did that with women's sports. I mean, I was an athlete growing up. People always ask me if I played soccer. I did, but actually my main sport was basketball and then crew. But no, I went to a 2015 Women's World Cup game with my 3 daughters, my husband, my parents, just to have fun in Vancouver in 2015. I had the time of my life. Sometimes I think I just hadn't had fun in a while. I was a 39-year-old working mom of 3. And I was like, oh, this is what fun feels like. And so, what do Americans do when they have fun? They want to spend money. So I ran around Vancouver trying to buy jerseys for my daughters at 9 stores, couldn't find them. I ran around then in LA trying to find content for this league I didn't know existed. And anyway, it was sort of surprising to me that you had this event where you had hundreds of millions of people, and now a billion people watched the last Women's World Cup finals watch it. But there was like nothing to do with that energy when it was done. So the analogy I made, it's like you have a 90-minute Gatorade commercial, and then there's no Gatorade in the store, But everyone told me I was the only one. You're the only one who wants Gatorade. And I was like, wow, really? Look at Instagram. So, there's a long story in between there and why women's sports. But ultimately what I realized is it was the first place in my life where all the things I cared about on sort of the nonprofit side or just the purpose side, community, joy, getting different people collaborating together, drove different outcomes. And you would build different, experiences. And ultimately these women's sports is about gathering community, providing entertainment, providing joy. And so in a lot of ways, it's like the best type of consumer investing you can do, I think, and no one else was doing it. And no one was, we'll talk about building Angel City, but I had this experience building the team with my 2 co-founders. And I felt that was replicable and that I could both drive a lot of returns and make people a lot of money by doing something first and early that I was passionate about that very few people actually believed in at the time. Now they do, but when we started, they didn't.
Right. So take me there to your thought process for a second, Kara, because again, a lot of people are like, okay, I'm not finding a jersey, and they go home and that's it, right? And for you, you decide to start this whole journey of raising capital and doing the things. And take me there for a second, especially in the beginning. Like, I'm sure people gave you a lot of hard time, a lot of, like you said, nobody needs this. How did you continue? How did you even start?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think if I were to write a book, or many books, one of them might be The Art of the Side Hustle, or Not All Your Hobbies and Passions Need to Be Your Job, right? And then if it's meant to be your job, it will magically turn into it. But I think we're all looking for things that bring us joy, right? And that might be mountain biking. It might be a cappella singing on the side. It might be having a glass of, wine from Bordeaux where you study Bordeaux. For me, I just got really, I am really curious and interested in lots of things. But what I know, I'll get interested in 5 or 10 different things in a week. And most of them just go away, right? Like, what are you interested in when you read the newspaper? Or you go to something and you're like, huh, why is it that way? But the things that stick around and you spend time on and for no reason at all, and that was what women's soccer was for me coming out of that game. I think those are the things to pay attention to, but you don't necessarily need to turn them into a job or something you make money from. Like you could truly just turn it, like have an interest. So that's what happened with me is I just was so intrigued, and I realize now looking at this moment of intrigue that I've had others like it. And it was like, how do you identify when something you're intrigued by sticks around and you actually put a ton of time into it? So I like to say I was joyfully irritated and like deeply curious that I so badly wanted to go watch Tobin Heath and Crystal Dunn and Alex Morgan and Abby Wambach play, but I couldn't. And that I so badly wanted to buy these jerseys and I couldn't. And that everyone was saying I was the only one, but my interest was so deep. So I started what now in retrospect looks like market research, and I just started talking to people and eventually like, why is this the case? And how do we know? It's like, how do you know that I'm the only one? And then eventually I started being introduced to the players. So they were all starting businesses at the time. And I was a venture capitalist. I'm like, free advice over here, and I became friends with a number of them and would help them as they were thinking about starting their clothing line or their community. And there was a lot of joy in just being kind of different kinds of people. I operated in tech and venture capital, and they operated in, extraordinary virtuosity on the field, but also were like these brilliant women who went to Stanford and UNC and UVA and, had a lot to offer the world off the pitch as well. And then eventually I was introduced to the head of the U.S. Women's National Team Players Union, a woman named Becca Rue, who I sat next to actually in an Angel City game last night and is like, there from day zero for me. And she asked me if I wanted to be an advisor to the union. So anyway, we can get into that. But it ultimately was just something I was really interested in, like the way people get interested in Mahjong or EDM music. And when you find joy and interest in it and you're talking about it all the time, which I was, you just follow it. And I created the space to follow it. My kids were finally old enough that I was allowed to have a hobby. And it just became, why can't I watch or buy things,
Right. Well, and I love that. And I do want to go there with you, Kara, because we're big believers in what I call portfolio career. I think that is part of the future anyway. Like, I think gone are the days that you just do this one thing for 40 years and retire with a golden watch and a party. But I think so. And what I also loved about what you said, Kara, and I want the listeners to absorb that. Volunteering your time is an incredible way to assess if this is something that you love to do more seriously. Like, I think it's just so beautifully that you just said, hey, let me try to help these people and see if this is taking me somewhere. But continue that story because I think this is important.
Yeah, I mean, like there's a bunch I could say on this. I think we are so wired to think about efficiency and transactability and did I get an ROI on my time or like an idea of like what makes us happy, right? I got to fit in the run or the push-ups. And like, I mean, those things do make us happy, are good for us. But, my husband, who's been like, an incredible partner, but also I realized recently, like he's an executive coach, but he became that kind of mid-career. I realized he'd been coaching me my whole career. He's always encouraged me and our kids to truly understand what intrinsic motivation feels like to a fault sometimes. Like if our daughter doesn't wake up for school, he's like, well, she just won't go to school. And I'm like, let's wake her up for school. Well, she really wants to go to school. She's going to wake herself up. Anyway, and so for me, he has me do this thing sometimes where he's like, just rate your energy after every person you meet, everything you do, your day, like truly understand where you're finding like subtle pockets of joy or energy and where you're doing things out of obligation. And a lot falls on either side, but a lot falls in between. And so I think this idea of like when you actually truly allow yourself just to like understand what lights you up and not need it to be anything, it's a hard thing to do as an American, like as an ambitious American, hard thing for me to do, I mean, and so I was at a stage of life, my youngest, I have three daughters. My youngest daughter at that game, I think was like 5. How old was she? She was like 2015.
Right.
Actually, she was pretty young. But my youngest daughter was old enough that it was like, oh, I could begin having a hobby again. And for a long time, I just was a workaholic. And I always loved what I
Right.
did. I loved tech and learning tech and working with founders or being a founder. But I finally realized I had this space for something that could just be mine. And people ask me all the time, did you do this for your kids? And it's been a powerful thing for them to see something that they understand and that I think
Right.
inspires them. But no, I did it for me. I really was curious and I loved it. And I love this community. So I think it's just like letting things sneak up on you, but then bringing the awareness to like, oh, how do I get serious about like really wanting to spend time on this thing?
Right.
Otherwise, we're so busy, we don't make time for things that don't make money or drive,
Right.
success in other people's eyes. And I think we're all looking for community. And so, sorry, maybe final thing I'll say is you mentioned this, but being, it's like, I think we're in a stage of life where we all just want more and more and more, and it impacts all of us, right? This gluttonous stage of development that we're in as a world possibly right now, where it's always like
Right.
something better or something you're missing out on is being marketed to you on social
Right.
media. And I actually think what we want is real relationships, people we can call up last minute and say, do you want to go on a walk? And one out of every two times they may say yes and do it. And then I think being in service around things that we have something unique to offer, where we feel valued and where we can like partner around the things that we're not as good at and not feel shame around it. And so
Right.
that is really what I discovered in the early days of like being curious about women's soccer and then women's sports, was that I had something to offer that was valued. I wasn't going to be paid for it, but it gave me joy. I could bring these players in the union into understanding kind of my world a little bit. And you can do that as like a parent, as a friend, as an anything. And I think like we're all pretty lonely and not doing enough of like just that.
Right. So, and I love what you just said, because, and I wrote down the rate your energy. I think it's very, very true. And I think we are living in a world that there's just endless possibilities, but I want to, and there's this constant game between, I'm going to look at it from the 30,000-foot view of what else is possible and what do I want to say yes to, but then you also want to focus. And at the end of the day, just start, like, okay, do I want to make this real or not? Right. And so you're helping the union, before we go back in time to your career, I want to kind of close the lid on this, like, because you created something incredible that nobody was there, nobody almost cared about, and you brought it to a whole different level. Take me to that journey for a second.
Yeah, and maybe I'll like try to like line it up to your sort of portfolio career. I think it's like a portfolio of just interest too, and having the right
Right.
sense of urgency around each one in your portfolio. So, I have a deep sense of urgency around my job, right? And then my kids. And
Right.
it's sort of like I'm always balancing that, and my husband. Um,
Right.
but I had sort of like a moderate sense of urgency around women's soccer. And there were other things I was just as interested in as at the time. And so if I think about it, it's like the interest began in 2015. I don't think I met Becca for a few years, And so at that point in time, I just was like thinking about it. I remember I couldn't get a jersey. I finally got a jersey from a friend of mine who worked at WME, which is one of the big agencies here.
Right.
And it was Carly Lloyd's jersey. I was trying to get actually Megan Klingenberg's jersey. Carly scores a lot of goals. Megan stops a lot of goals at the time. But it was like, it was just this little of like, or I'd be at an event or a dinner or somewhere, I talked to a friend of mine who ended up on our board at Angel City being like, why doesn't women's sports get put on traditional media distribution? He's like, because it's, you can't get sponsors against it. And so like you still may get more sponsors against men's lacrosse than you do against women's soccer. And so anyway, but I just started like kind of talking to people, and I'm like, then going to really what we call first principles. But so the curiosity, and by the way, that wasn't right for women's sports. So there were a lot of people who thought things that were like not
Right.
first principle thinking, that were kind of, and we can get into that if you want to, But I think it's a portfolio of interests and just being ready for serendipity to show up, right? Like I got introduced to Becca Rue by a woman named Heidi Patel. She runs an impact fund. She runs the biggest impact fund, maybe in the world, at least in the US, Rethink Impact. And she's like, God, my friend Kara, and she calls me something else. I have a lot of nicknames. They're all PG, but she's always talking about women's soccer as this example of X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to introduce her to Becca. She spoke at an event we threw and she was amazing. And that happened years later. And then Becca was like, and we had these constant little butterfly effects. Julie, my co-founder at Angel City, who's the CEO of Angel City, I played basketball against her in high school. We had a pickup women in tech basketball game. And literally was at that game. I was like, hey, Julie, I'm working on this soccer thing. Do you want to come hear about it? Go to a game with me on the men's side? She's like, sure. I'll watch any sport once. So anyway, there's all these little things that showed up, but they didn't show up immediately versus like, I think about COVID, and I think COVID played a role in all of this. I think a lot of things played a role in all of this, but COVID was the first time in my career I wasn't traveling a ton. I had time to slow down and really like think about what lit me up. But I picked up a lot of things during COVID. I mean, I became a downhill mountain biker during COVID. So I picked up like women's sports in an even bigger, we were already off and running with Angel City, but it is when I started thinking about like, how does it scale even beyond a team? And so I think it's just like presence, to know when things hit you, to realize what people may be important, to like allow things to marinate and go away, but also to allow them to come back. And then for me, it's about people. Like I'm inspired by like having accountability with people who kind of begin to see what I see. And I do see certain things earlier than others, where it's real.
Right.
And then it's sort of like, if I find an accountability partner and I'm working with someone who gives me energy, and sometimes this is like somebody who just makes me want to write and it's a friend, but other times like, Natalie Portman and then Julie Ehrman, finding the two of them, I was like, oh, these women see the world the way I see the world. And then it was like a 1 + 1 + 1 equaled 35,000, but it marinated for a while before I got there.
And I love that because I think I want to go there just for a second because I think we're also impatient creatures, right? Like we want everything yesterday and it should be big and famous, right? And I think it's interesting to see like how do you balance between the venture capital operations, tech operations hat that you have, which probably was a lot of go, 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 go. And then on the other hand, the patience to just kind of simmer in this and give it a shot. And then once it feels right, I also want to hear what actually made it into a green light and let's go, and what made it a success.
Yeah, no, you're actually really making me think about this real time because there's certain things in my life right now that I'm not taking my own advice on. I'm not feeling particularly patient around, and it's like, oh, I want this outcome now. And if it's not happening, just the idea that I could sit in the gray and let it be, knowing hopefully I have another 50 to 70 years to live or another day. None of us knows. So I think the things we really want and need to happen that are a core part of our identity or like our day-to-day happiness, whether it's work, relationships, whatever, it's really hard to take this advice. So I'm going to try to take my own advice later on this. But yeah, sorry, where did you specifically want me to go? You just got me thinking and I forgot the question.
No, but I think it's always it's something that I always simmer in. But I want you to talk to me for a second from the moment that you're saying, you know what, let me, I simmered in this, I met these people, I know I can add some value. What makes you say, okay, this is what we're doing, and now you're starting to create this partnership and raising capital? Like, take me for a second on that journey, because I'm sure there's also a journey of rejections and hardship and doubt. So take me on that journey.
My husband said to me last night, he's like, you realize you're in the rejection business. Like you say you don't love rejection, but you get so much rejection. And I'm like, you're right, but I still don't like it in certain contexts. In other contexts, I'm like, reject me, yeah. Listen, it was this confluence of things that happened, and Always played a really big role in it. So I have this interest in soccer. trying to think what else I was interested at the time. I've always been interested in personal development and self-improvement. So I got really interested, like I'd always been, I'm just going to paint the picture. I've always interested in how do I be better? How do we build great cultures? But I kind of came across it very scientifically. And during this time, I also was getting really interested in things that my family of origin would consider woo-woo, personality profiling, enneagrams, astrology. How do you construct teams in a way where you really understood people's energy and motivation and core vice and not just, kind of their tactical skills. So I'm always curious about like a whole lot of things. I mean, right now I'm reading about Margaret Thatcher and the coal mines and I'm going to just sound really smart here for a second. I'm sort of being forced to read it because I'm doing a fellowship at the Aspen Institute, but I'm also really enjoying it. Like I feel like I'm back in college. So I have a portfolio of things. What really got me serious though about, what led to Angel City was I think finding like purpose in creating kind of the nonprofit I was involved in starting in the beginning, Always. And then the friendships that came out of that and realizing I was making like real friendships, not like, how do we do deals and who's going to send me what, but real friendships with women at my stage of career, female partners in venture capital firms, because we had a joint project to work on. And like, we tend to go golfing together less than maybe, what others, like what men might do at our age and stage. So to make that concrete, things got, I think, pretty serious around the time that we were starting Always. And there were 15 of us right now. It's like the whole industry, and it's been built 10 times over by extraordinary people. Page CEO is incredible, Aileen Lee and Jess Lee who got it going. But there were 15 of us in the beginning who were just like, hey, there's a bunch of weird stuff going on in tech, and a bunch of things that were just really upsetting to us. And I was one of two people from LA who flew up to the Bay Area and just started working on like, how do we help female founders and women in venture firms? And we launched a bunch of projects, female founder office hours, a data project to look at the percentage of women in venture funds and GPs, a bunch of things around that. And I kind of like was responsible for business development with other organizations because there was a number starting at the same time and then running a female founders office hours event in LA. And so I just started working with a lot of the women, Jess Lee, Eva Ho, Kirsten Green, and we all became friends. And through that, I realized I ended up getting to know a lot of the women in Hollywood involved in Time's Up and other things like that. And then eventually this is actually a fun part of the story. So I'll get crystallized here. We had an event in where kind of women from different parts of the business industry, from Hollywood to tech to, finance to media, got together to just sort of collaborate on how do we get to know each other and how do we bring, how do we just help more women get into senior roles and underrepresented people. And they asked me to speak on stage to represent tech. And at the end of that time, it was a small room, it was 150 people. I said a bunch of things like, let's make the room bigger. How do we bring men in? How do we bring more women in? But I said, while we're here, go make a new friend in an industry where you probably are never going to do work, and just make a new friend, get their number, go out to a meal and see if they're weird, block them, but maybe you'll make a new friend. And the person who came up to me and gave me her number was Natalie Portman. And that was sort of like, and we went and had a meal and we talked about everything in the world. In the last 10 minutes, I told her about my work with the U.S. Women's National Team Players Union. She said, how can I help? And then I brought her in. I mean, she has many more Instagram followers than anyone else I knew,
right,
who had asked that. And we threw an event together to bring her actress friends. I brought my tech friends. And the lead up to the 2019 Women's World Cup, you can still find the picture of her and Eva Longoria, and Izo Budo and Jessica Chastain. And I brought my tech friends, Ali Rosenthal and Claire Hughes Johnson from Stripe. And I don't know, there's just a ton of people down there, Layla Sturdy. And like everyone loved meeting each other and sort of like new friendships were emerging. And then eventually Natalie looked at me and was like, why don't we start a team? The idea had never crossed my mind. And I went to the men's teams and said, like, how can I help you start a team for free? I just wanted it to exist. And so I can go from there. But ultimately, like, I would say no one really believed in it. But and I said to Natalie, are you crazy? Like, I think you need to be a billionaire. And, you know, much later in life, and she said, no, I think we could do it. Don't you know how to do that? And I'm like, well, I know how to, build teams and raise capital, but like, I don't have a stadium in my back pocket. But so I went to the men's teams, and then I realized, well, we have a bunch of stadiums in LA. And ultimately, and then I'll pause after this, was doing a lot of work to try to get other people to say yes and own all of it. But I was doing a lot of work on it. And Natalie was doing a lot of work on it. And she said, is this how it works in your industry? Right. And I'm a venture capitalist at the time. You do all the work, or we do all the work, and somebody else owns it. And I was like, no, there's something called founder equity. And so we just kind of completely switched our mindset, and we're like, I was like, oh, I'm in the business of building things, but also pricing risk. What would be the risk of me and Natalie and then Julie starting this like you would a tech company, and owning 100% of it as founders, not having a license to operate in LA, not having a stadium, but having like a real plan as to how we would do that. And then we ended up raising just shy of $1 million after a long process, and many people being like, you guys are nuts. But 3 weeks before COVID, at, a $6 million valuation. So we gave away 15% of the company, but we owned 85% of it, right? And then COVID came, and then you're like, oh my God, we got to figure this out. So anyway, that's how Angel City started. And I would say it was, as someone who's like grown up in business and in this world, it was very organic. We started Angel City in 2019, but I started thinking about this in 2015, and it was a 4-year journey of just not having an agenda and just following my interest and getting to know the players and the union and everything else.
And it's an incredible story. So take me there, because I'm fascinated, because I want to continue it. You decide, I'm sure, first of all, there's a ton of rejections on that $1 million. Is there a moment where you're saying, am I kidding me? Like, what on earth am I doing?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Natalie and I met, I don't know, 2018, maybe 2009, early 19. No, maybe 18. Anyway, I don't remember exactly.
Right.
Getting Julie involved was like, a major milestone in retrospect, right? And I took her, Natalie and I took her to an LAFC game August of 2019. And that's when we really like started working like 2 a.m. on this, and Julie and I were like sending decks back and forth, and Natalie would give us feedback, and, really trying to like refine the model. How much revenue could we drive? And like, just get ready to like, okay, we got the team, we can do this together. Who are we going to go to lease a stadium, all this stuff. And, I mean, we still didn't, and I like, was pretty good at the whole fundraising thing. I think it was sort of like we had got a lot of people close to yes, and then they would pass in the last moment. It was like, what kind of investor are we bringing in? And actually at the game last night, someone was reminding me about one investor I really wanted. He ran a very big private equity firm. A bunch of my friends had worked for him at one of the big banks, kind of all the things, like great investor, great operator, great human, had really supported, all different kinds of people rising in his organization. And I remember he called me, I think it was January, and said, I'm going to pass. And I still remember why. And I was just like on the floor, like, God, I thought this was it. And so there were moments where I'm a pretty, like, if I believe in something, I'll keep going. But I also always gave founders the advice, like, eventually you have to take the signal, and your time is valuable. And maybe you're wrong, like at some point, or you figure out how to do it without needing capital. And in this case, like, but Julie would pull me up. And the same thing, like when she had those moments, I'd pull her up. So a lot of what I think made this work ultimately was Julie and I were never down at the same moment. But I mean, we kind of gave ourselves April as the deadline. And we got the capital, kind of closed in February. But I remember like January being really low, really low.
Wow.
I didn't know if I was raising $50 million or $500,000. I knew ultimately it was probably going to take 50 million, and in venture you'd raise like a $4 million seed, and then your whatever crazy Series A's are now, your $10 million, $20 million series, and you just go. Here, it was like we did it in a way that was like different. There, to my knowledge, I think we're the only C Corp in sports, and it was a kind of a founder-driven thing. Every other team has the concept of a control owner, which we ultimately had, and we brought in an investor to be that. But, I mean, a couple investors to be that at different stages, but it was like, I didn't know. Like I went out looking for someone who was going to own, 90% of it. Maybe we'd get an equity pool as founders and be our control owner and backstop everything and be ready to put in 50 million. So there was a lot of learnings around like, to go to seed or Series A investors if you're starting a tech company. I'm like going to family offices and some funds, and then our friends, some of whom who happen to be famous. And, and so it was very confusing. How much are you raising? How do you price it? Are you doing rounds? Is this more venture-like or is this more sports-like? And we ended up more venture-like and then more sports-like. But it was like a real journey of like, what is our product market fit even in finding the right funding
capital
source?
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's such an interesting, especially because you did come from, again, you have a ton of tech, we'll talk about it in a second, and a ton of investment and venture capital. And still just hearing your story, I think is really, really important. Because I literally wrote this quote, you are in the rejection business. Like, I think every single person that is driven and wants more from their career, from their life, will eventually push their limits to be in the rejection business. And I think, the bigger you're trying to aim, the more rejections you're gonna face.
Yeah. And one other thing I could say is like, I mean, it's a takeaway from talking to you today. It's almost like you can like segment rejection. There's some rejection is comfortable for me taking. There's other rejection that hurts every time I get it, and it's like the ones where you think it's going to happen and then it doesn't in the last minute, or like you don't feel seen by someone that you have like a deep relationship with versus like, this just isn't for me. And up front, now that I raise capital for a fund, right? I run with my partner, Jasmine Robinson, Monarch Collective. We're $250 million women's sports fund. And, we raise that fund also when like another one doesn't exist. More will come, but there's some real first mover advantages where I love getting rejection around our fund because it's just like those people often become my friends because like it's what we do is really different. We're going to really differentiate in how we make people money. We're in this risk asymmetry that no one else is in, the most mature parts of the women's sports ecosystem. And there's a whole lot of people who are like, well, this isn't for my university. And by the way, like a lot of university endowments are like, this very much is for my university. It's uncorrelated. It's culturally impactful. It's differentiated, all that stuff. But if you then stop and are like, okay, I'm not going to get this order for the thing I know. Some of those people have become my really close friends. And then they come back to me and they're like, why aren't you pitching me? I'm like, because I thought we were friends, No. And so it's like, it's almost like segment rejection. And where is it hard for you? And where is it easy? And then what are the other things in life behind that rejection that could be positive? On the personal relationship front, like that's where like, or like with my husband rejecting me and like, hey, I want to go to this festival. We can't go to that festival. Wait, why not? Because I always want to do more than he does. So anyway, I think it's interesting to segment rejection, understand where it's easy and where it's hard. Because I think as human beings, we're all in the rejection business if we're trying to find purpose in work, passion in love and in relationship. And we're looking like for plans, like how often do you invite yourself to someone's house? If you did it more often, you'd probably have more of the plans you want. And if people could just say no, you might be having more of the plans you want to have.
But so with this in mind, and with kind of how you look at rejections and pitching people and not being afraid, and and I'm hearing a lot of things about also like looking at a big, huge, humongous project and instilling it into smaller projects. But let me take you back in time for a second to how did you even get into the venture world in the first place? Like, again, there was like Morgan Stanley and Battery Ventures. Like, Take me for a second to like a little bit back in time. How did you even get into this pretty crowded, kind of male dominated area? Like, how did you even get in?
Yeah. I mean, so I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in LA. I did my undergrad at Princeton. I studied politics and did a side of a lot of other things, economics, et cetera. But honestly, I didn't really have a background in finance. And then coming out of school, I was deciding between working at Morgan Stanley in their captive private equity firm, which was very quantitative, very specific, sit around, build big models all day and night, or going to work for a consumer protection nonprofit. Unfortunately, you can't do that anymore. But those were like my two interests. And in a way, what I'm doing now, it's like bringing those two together.
Combining,
And
yeah.
honestly, I mean, I actually ran into one of the guys who convinced me to go work at Morgan Stanley this week at this like event where I was talking to university endowments and pensions. And I was like, God, would I even be in this room if it wasn't for this guy who had like taken me to a meal? And what he said to me was, Kara, if you come to Morgan Stanley, and you do well and learn finance, you can do all your other save the world stuff. You're going to have a skill set to go save the world. So go get a skill that like scales across both. And so it's a little bit of the life advice that it's like, okay, you should follow your passions, but also, I mean, it's like, what do I tell my daughters now in a world of AI? What are the skills to have? What are the skills that could really span across a lot of different things? And so that was good advice. And then honestly, you would interview with different groups at Morgan Stanley. You take the job and then you didn't know what group you were in. And I just ended up in like one of the maybe two or three there that was the most quantitative, hardest. I'd never used Excel. I'd never taken a finance course. And I'm like, I'll go do the hardest one. But I was scared. I mean, it was scary, and I was wearing nylons and suits. So the way I ultimately, but I did it, and, I did pretty well. But I also realized the things even then that made me feel different, and they weren't things I necessarily felt good about. I think, sometimes I say it took starting a professional women's soccer team in my 40s with two other women to have confidence in myself and understand where what I saw differently was a positive. And everyone says they want cognitive diversity in their firms. But I think the hard thing is when you think differently in a firm, and if you've actually spent the time to like gain credibility and learn how that firm works and learn how that industry works, like you can't come in at day one and be like, here are all my ideas and they're better than yours. But if you've done that, it's very hard to not feel like these are bad or wrong, or I must not be getting it right. I think that's disproportionately female, but it could be male as well. Like, if you come from a different socioeconomic background, different race, a different kind of family. And so I guess what I would say is one of the things that was different about me at Morgan Stanley was like, I seemed to want to become the expert on like back in the day, DSL or cable modems or unbundling local loops, which was like what tech was in the, 1997 when I was there. And then I was reading books like Electrical Engineering for Non-Electrical Engineers and being asked to send to conferences. And then once I cold called a company that I thought we should look at, and I'm working on leverage buyouts, right, in healthcare and chemicals. And they're like, you can't do that. You can't call companies. You just model quietly and sit in the room. And I just got really passionate about tech. And I did sit in a room of a board of this telecom company with Rick Frisbee, who was the founder of Battery Ventures. And he took a liking to me. We had a meal and he was like, why don't you come work for us? And I mean, it wasn't that easy, but I interviewed to work for them along with a lot of private equity firms and hedge funds. And I took a 50% pay cut. I remember my dad, who's a doctor, being like, why is everyone else you're working with going and making more money? And you're taking a pay cut to go work at Battery Ventures. But it just felt like the gold rush to me. I love learning about like the protocols and OSI stacks and super nerdy stuff. And I just found that a lot more interesting than manure business, a buyout on a manure business. And I love the innovation. So that's how I ended up at Battery. And then it's a whole story from there. But I, learned to cold call and source, and I loved it. And it turns out like wedding those two skill sets of like learning tech, being able to go out and generate business and like, sell things you believed in, and then being able to, work on what it's like you, what is it? You eat what you kill, I guess.
Right.
So I do the due diligence, and then eventually I would even get the board roles. So I was given my first couple board roles at Battery in my mid-20s, and I was learning from Tom Crotty, Rick Frisbee, Todd Diggers, all these guys who were like went on to either start other firms or like build one of the best firms around in Battery Ventures.
Oof, that's incredible. And I think one of the things that I literally just talked about was somebody from, we were sitting on the same board. And I was like, one of the best pieces of sitting on a board is that yes, obviously you get to help and, et cetera, and with your, and share knowledge, et cetera. But the biggest thing is you sit with really smart people and you learn from each other. It's like, it's pretty amazing. But then you went into the tech
By the
world.
way,
Yeah, go for
one
it.
other quick thing I'd say too is like it was a different time in venture. In a lot of ways, I make the analogy to the way it is in women's sports now, where it's like there are not very many firms looking at and doing what we're doing, but yet like when we invest in the Boston expansion franchise and they buy in at $50 million, and the last franchise went to Denver at 100 and whatever it is, 20 million, like. We are there as Boston's partner. We're working every day with them on stadium financing, building the executive team, and we're doing it at a much lower valuation than just the right to operate in another market. So your downside's protected, right? And your upside is venture-like, but we were the only ones working on it. And it requires like stakeholder relationships and operating skills and coming out of Angel City. My partner came out of the 49ers. Venture wasn't that different back then. There were 5 firms in Boston, 5 firms in the Bay Area. Now there's thousands. It's an efficient market,
Right.
but it was inefficient back then. And so I also like you could price things reasonably, you could exit reasonably and generate 5 to 10x funds because the market was behaving more responsibly, and it was much more fragmented. And so it is one of the things like I learned being not just at Battery, like these were like really high integrity, hardworking, low ego guys, just like hustle harder, do the right thing, never sit on more than 6 boards at the time. And we're it's kind of a similar model right now in women's sports.
Right.
And so I've thought a lot about that, as well, and the analogies there and how different venture is now, where it's so much of it is marketing and it's such an efficient market,
Oof, and saturated, but we'll talk about it in a second. But okay, so then you decide to become an operator, right? I mean, there's like IAC and Urban Spoon, and you're in those executive level roles. What do you feel are some of the maybe hard lessons that you learned in, when you switch from, venture to actually an operator? Because I'm sure it's very different experiences as well, which I'm sure you're also bringing in today. So.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent people who listen to this are thinking about like, am I an operator and am I an investor? I think a lot of people go through that journey. And I always say, am I well suited to both or ill suited to both? But I think ultimately what I've realized over the course of my life and career is I'm a very operationally oriented investor. And you can kind of hit either side of it, but knowing how to structure, be disciplined, be intellectually honest, and like walk or chase, and price risk is a real skill set, right? And I learned that at Morgan Stanley and private equity, at Battery Ventures, at Upfront Ventures, and at IAC, where I started in M&A and ended up co-heading the M&A group. And there we were very creative structurers. I worked for Victor Kaufman, who was Barry Diller's right hand, and is still a mentor to me. And it was really about how do you generate, EBITDA, or what they called OIBA. Right. But every structure was different. And in a lot of ways, actually, that's what I now really, my partner Jasmine Robinson and I do at Monarch. Every deal is structured differently, and but the risk outcome is the same. So, but the operational side I always really valued, because like I think there are 2 kinds of investors who emerge over time. There are those who are portfolio managers and sort of generally know how to price risk, manage a big portfolio, and are more passive. And then there are those that are really operational, hands-on, and your portfolio size is an indicator. You may say you're operational and hands-on, but if you haven't scaled a huge operating team to go alongside a big portfolio, it's hard to do that. And so I'd always wanted to be an operator. I'd worked for my summer in between my 2 years at business school at Microsoft. I'd always been placed in corp dev. Like nobody wanted me to be an operator. And so IAC was this opportunity to come into M&A, do something I knew how to do. And if I did a good job, IAC had a reputation for taking senior executives in corporate and giving them a chance to operate. And it was one of my most fun most intellectually honest. Like I loved the job. And it also a meritocracy, like there were two women in corporate, me and Shanna Fisher, but it was a really like much more cognitively diverse group. And, like we were in a way really disciplined, but we'd come in and be like, how do we get something in front of Barry that moves his brain? And then how do we like beat each other up in the nicest way possible to find out if this is something IAC should do? And so while I was there, we spun out Ticketmaster, HSN, Lending Tree. We also incubated Vimeo out of College Humor. And then I moved into these operating roles where I ran a bunch of businesses. Some were falling knives, some were high growth. So Urban Spoon, super high growth. We took it from 1 million to 30 million users, first iPhone product. I was part of, led the team when we were building out a Salesforce, rolled out a competitive product to OpenTable, ended up selling it to OpenTable, but also City Search, which was like going like this when I was given to it. I ended up playing a key role in incubating what became Tinder while I was pregnant with my third child, and recruited Sean Radin, and just like, that was incubated out of LA for a mobile incubator where this became, I think, the main thing that generated returns and is obviously the heart and soul of a dating business now. So there was a lot of diversity there. And so what I would say is like, I love building things. Right now, what I'm loving building is Monarch as a firm. So we have an investment product, but we are building a company at Monarch. Many of the people we hire come out of operating roles at like, the MLS or, the NFL or a big team in England, and we train them to be investors. And then we have excellent investors who are great at structuring, but we're building it much more like a company than a firm. And so what I'm doing now is the best of both worlds. I think a lot of the journey is just knowing what you personally love, and then honestly finding a great partner who complements you. And I've really found that at Monarch, and I really found that at Angel City with Julie and Natalie.
Which is incredible, because that's also one of the hardest pieces. So before we jump back to Monarch and Angel, a little bit about, I think kind of where I started hearing about you, and we talked a little bit about it, is in Upfront Ventures. And so talk to me a little bit. I mean, I think that was kind of like was it your first partner role in a, pretty prominent, you're next to Mark Suster, who is very vocal, like you see, at least at that point was like, yes. I don't know, like we saw him all over. What was that like? So share a little bit, because I wonder how much of it you're taking with you, how much of it is less, but I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, everyone I've worked with and for in my career has been extraordinary at something. And I think this in general is a thing to get in touch with. Like we all have spiky superpowers. And like, Mark, for example, like it was just incredible how he would see talent and bring it in and really understand sort of like how to build a fund, right? And the LP side and all the other things. But like, I think for it's something I think about is like, where does everybody spike? And you want kind of I always say, like, I was actually I'm going through, like thinking through our next, kind of fund right now, because pipeline's really good. And, and we have, a lot of interest coming in and the like. But I kind of like, I know that this word used to irritate me, but now I love it. I was going back to first principles. I'm like, what is really different about us? What is our differentiated product before we invest, after we invest? What, how has Monarch become this brand? And then like, why do we have the right to win? And then why do people want to work here, and work with us? And, there's a lot of things in there. First mover, our operational value add product, et cetera. But one of them was like, we really have 10Xers in terms of people, and they all spike on something. And then I have like gone above and beyond to figure out with my partner, Jasmine, how do we be collaborative internally? How do we pass the baton back and forth? And when do we double up on things, which we do a lot, where somebody's strong at one thing and somebody else is strong at another thing. And so I think being at Upfront and all the firms that came before that, it's like each one of them, I took something away that, I started Monarch in my mid 40s, and I wasn't necessarily, a lot of things I've done that people now know me for. Angel City, which for those who don't know Angel City, it was the first majority female-owned, female-led professional sports team in the country. We went from 0 to 30 million in revenue our first year, and had more season ticket holders than 2 professional teams in LA. And we really proved out the commercial model for a women's sports team was viable. We built the first P&L, and then a lot of the other teams, like, there were a lot of people who've been doing work for a long time, but everyone said a professional sports team in LA wouldn't work. Another one, like essentially an 12th one. And so I think we showed that, if you build an incredible experience, butts and seats, and you have a product on the field that people just don't get, but is as fun, if not more fun than anything else out there, it can work. And we exceeded our initial forecast in our first year live by 4.2x. How often does that happen in venture? So I just want to mention that.
Wait, don't go. So let's go there for a second. If you already mentioned it, let's go there, because like 30 minutes ago, we talked about getting the first $1 million for anything related, right? And now we're talking about this like mega success, huge team, bridge the gap for us. What happened? What made it a success?
Sorry, for Angel City or for Monarch?
Both.
Okay. For Angel City, I would say it really was a unique dynamic between me, Julie, and Natalie. I mean, so first of all, I do think the market timing was right for something like us to emerge, but it was hard. I mean, it was the hardest 6 years of work in my life until we brought Bob Iger and Willow Bay in as our control owners. And we're all still very involved and have equity stakes, and Julie's the CEO. But, it was like, so the market though was maybe, so I don't know. I mean, did we create the market or was the market ready? I guess we could have that debate. I think it really was like Natalie had this sort of very, we were all mission oriented, but she really held it. Like, what does it mean to have representation? I remember we had certain conversations around stadiums where we're going to have rooms where people could nurse, and how are we going to create an environment that really stood for our values? Julie just ran through walls, and so did I, right? And I think, but we'd all, in this case, kind of, in a way, Julie and I had similar skill sets, but we both kind of could sit in the complementary nature of them, and fundraising, building a team, getting sponsors on board, building community. I'd say one thing, Julie was out at every community event. We did 300 community events, and we pioneered a new sponsorship model. We donated 10% of every sponsor contract into a community cause. So DoorDash, we broke records. They were a $10 million contract for our front kit, which is unheard of. And we hadn't sold a single season ticket or had a single player, but we'd go to dinner with these people and we tell them the vision. And I think we inspired people to believe it was possible. And that changed things. And then now it kind of blows my mind. When I go to games, even last night, I got a note from my friend who was in from the Bay Area, my friend Michael, who said, I get it now. This is a community, and I'm randomly bumping into someone I grew up with or my teacher from preschool. I grew up in LA. I know these people, but that's the case for everyone. I'll just meet different groups of people who are have a whole group of friends that they meet there and they love. So that was Angel City. And I think it was honestly, we just killed ourselves working on it. At some point I realized this was my life's work, and it wasn't, to be managing partner of a traditional venture capital firm. And I had to recognize that. That was a big change for me because I loved Upfront. It was where I thought I would spend, I thought I'd be in venture the rest of my career. I got this job I thought I wanted. And so one might call that a midlife awakening, but I listened to it and it was scary because there wasn't the concept of Monarch out there. And I didn't know if I was going to ever make money again, right? And I have 3 kids and live in LA. So I think it is really finding that thing. And when it speaks to you, and it may speak to you in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s. Arianna Huffington didn't start her first business until her 50s. So I think it's just being ready for that when it shows up, and then finding people that you can walk with who inspire you, and knowing when to run through walls and take risk.
I love that, because I want to go into Monarch. And I think, we're big believers, especially now that we see people leaping again, that the pace of change is ripe, that you're going to change anyway every year or two, right? And it might be in the same place, but then in the same place, you'll change functions, you'll change responsibilities, you'll change whatever. And it might be in different industries, or it might be a portfolio, or it might be another venture that you're after. So I think you will find those, you're just going to need to leap again and adapt. But now, let's go with Monarch, because again, like at some point you decided to leave this incredible venture that you were part of. And that must be scary.
Yeah, it was really scary. And by the way, one quick thing just on what you said. So we wrote a case study for a business school on Angel City, and there was a fair amount of interest in doing that. And one thing I realized that was important to me was that we put it in a class that was not a sports class, even though like we love the sports classes and we've done cases in sports classes, but how we built Angel City, I really wanted it to be in a class where many people who think they know what they're doing, which I thought I know what I was doing when I was 28 and graduating from business school, could think about like, you think you know what your application is, but actually like finding the thing that's uniquely yours to do may come at different times. And it may be an area that you're very insecure about, you're nervous about, the world doesn't see. So I wanted to inspire people to do that. And so Julie and Natalie and I wrote the case with Harvard, and it's in their kind of like second year elective with Jeffrey Raport, Scaling Ventures. And it's everyone, because I think these things pop up sometimes, when you least expect it. And the story of that to me is transcends sports, right? And so Monarch, similar thing. Honestly, I had a spiritual moment in a cathedral in Spain, as ridiculous as that sounds.
It does.
I was in a cathedral in Seville with my husband and daughters, and I had this moment where I was like, it takes hundreds of years to build these cathedrals. And when we go to Europe, we visit cathedrals, we visit the Colosseum, we visit palaces. Again, one of the reasons we call it Monarch, building new kinds of monarchies that can stand the test of time, the yin and the yang, the black, brown, and white, the male and female. But I was in this cathedral and I'm laying the brick in the middle of a cathedral that, there's a lot of them, and it was a really good one, but like, I see something and feel something in women's sports, which is really just consumer or community, right? Like if you think about women's sports or sports, the men, right, like the whole ecosystem is probably $500 billion total addressable market. The women's side is a couple billion, and it was like a few hundred million, 100 million when we started. So it's a venture market growing quickly. It's a fraction of the men's side. But if you think about it, these are like monopolistic consumer IP platforms. So there's no reason why this can't be trillions of dollars, and it's $500 billion now, but the women's side is teeny. But like that segment, if you do things a certain way, like Angel City or like the New York Liberty or like, teams we're looking at now in Europe, and you build the cap table in a certain way, you get the best talent in, and you drive financial outcomes, you can also drive cultural outcomes. You can get a different fan base in. You're going to get different sponsor partners and activate them in different ways. So if you go to a Liberty game now, and I was there last week with a bunch of our LPs after a wonderful industry event we threw where we explained to everyone how the market works. They have their Fenty cam, and it's like was Fenty, and it's great. It's like a kiss cam, but with women and their makeup or men in their makeup. And, you look at all the sponsors that are coming into teams like Angel City, Liberty, Boston Unity, which is another one of our investments, San Diego Wave, another one of them. It's a whole category of like brands that have never advertised in sports, period. Right. Like there's no reason the women's side couldn't be bigger. But I think like Monarch started for me there. I wrote this little Jerry Maguire memo, and I'm like, I got to go do this. I gotta build something where we can help more teams, leagues, and rights, but like teams be more like Angel City, where we can come in as a large shareholder, work alongside family offices. In some cases, we help them bid and understand the market entirely. In other cases, we come in later side by side, and we bring talent, we bring brand sponsors, we bring our brains, we bring, and so I wrote this memo, and then I went looking for a partner, and Jasmine and I just really hit it off. She has this extraordinary background at Bain and then the 49ers. She was in every operational role, more or less, it's just a star when they moved from Candlestick to Levi's. And we shared a similar vision when honestly, many others didn't. Now a lot of people do. But when we came together, a handful of years ago, this was exotic. And we set out to raise 100. We ultimately realized the right fund size was 250. That was our hard cap, which is a nice thing to say as a fund manager. But we have a very disciplined strategy where we're only focusing on the most premium brands teams, leagues, and rights that can have cultural impact and drive, can drive financial returns in a way that are unique. So that's
It's
how it
absolutely
started, with a
incredible.
memo and a partner who was a great compliment to me.
This is so beautiful. So right now, what do you want people? And I think are you guys raising again, or are you gals raising again for
We're not
Monarch?
raising right now,
Or
but we're always meeting. We're always meeting like-minded. I mean, we also care about impact. We're an impact fund, so we really look for values alignment in every part of our ecosystem. And if you come to our LP meetings, it's like some of the top family offices and institutions in the world, and they're the most fun, right? And so it's like deep intellect and deep joy. And we say no to people on occasion. And keeping like that alignment is important, but we're always meeting new LPs and the like, and we try to spend time getting to know each other far in advance, because it is a real two-way relationship. And so anyway, but yeah, I'd
incredible.
say pipeline is really exciting and strong. We do a lot of thesis-based work, so we try to, like, we'll have theses we're running that we won't invest in for 2 to 5 years, but where we're mapping stakeholders in a new sport or a new country. So we invest between the US and Europe: soccer, basketball, golf, tennis. We spend time in, volleyball, hockey, cricket, rugby, but we spend the most time in those first 4 sports where media revenue is up and to the right, and where we can get the core business to break even or better. So it's really like a venture-like market with a growth equity kind of risk profile, and it's fun, and we help people learn. And a lot of those people go on to buy their own teams. Like, sometimes they don't become investors in Monarch, but like side-by-side partners or just friends in the ecosystem, because we're all operating together in these leagues, and hopefully we can help a lot of people learn, like, why would you invest in women's sports versus men's? What's the right president profile for a women's team versus men, or a chief revenue officer? Or like, how would you build a season ticket holder base and challenge your assumptions? Because for many of the best teams, the overlap with the men's team in that market is like less than 10%. So where do you kind of look at doing things the same, but what you do differently is maybe the most important to build, Real Madrid or the Cowboys or the Lakers or Dodgers, because that's where you are in women's sports. We don't know who all those teams are going to be. They're being built right now, and they may be worth many billions of dollars over the course of the next couple decades.
That's incredible. And that's so exciting, because it is changing everything in the ecosystem. So I'm just so inspired by this conversation, Kara, and what you guys are doing. So.
And I mean, maybe last thing, we have an all-female firm. We look to hire, though, like kind of really in an open way. And so we put every job spec out on LinkedIn. It's been incredible to see the response just from that. Even we just made our first hire over in Europe, in London, to see the amount of people with interest, over there. But I think we really do try to think about how to build a firm that can look at every investment in an intellectually honest way, and so I think I'm personally passionate about just sort of how do you build financial institutions too, in a way that is not just different to be different, but like that we're culture skills, because I think people enjoying their jobs is how you be 10x in the thing you're excellent around. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. It's sitting next to Becca Rue, who runs the national team players union last night. She said, "Have you looked back at the last, 7 or 8 years and everything?" You're like, maybe, and it's just, I don't get to do it as often, but it's hard work. But I have a lot of gratitude for being able to be on podcasts like this occasionally and talk about it. So thanks for having me.
Oh, it was so fun. So maybe summarize that. Like, if you would look at yourself, you would meet yourself, I don't know, 10, 20 years back, what would you want to know?
Oh, God.
What would you tell yourself?
I got the chills when you asked me that question. I think operate out of abundance and not fear. And when you're feeling the fear, you just can't make it go away, but like sit in the pain and the fear. And it's, I have a good life. I'm really grateful for it. And I've learned a lot of things, over the years. I've been to I did a lot of executive coaching and a lot of things to like make this change, and feel responsible for earning income for my family. And I have a really good life, and, went to the Hoffman Institute. Anyone has some self-improvement questions, I'm your woman. But I would say lean in. I guess I'd say like when you're feeling the pain, personal pain, professional pain, know that don't run away from something, sit in it. It's always better to run to something and know what you're running to. And, like figure out ways to like actually figure out ultimately, I have this executive coach that was life-changing. Her name's Diana Chapman. She's started Conscious Leadership Group. She changed my life probably more than anyone other than my parents, my husband and my kids. And, she talks about aliveness and just how you find it. And then just kind of like how you just keep getting curious and not defensive. And I think I would say gratitude, look for the joy. And then if you are in a place where you can take risk, even if you have a huge expense line and things like this, just look at how long you have to go and then try it. And then know when you're going to stop. And it's going to be okay. Like, it's going to be okay. As my husband always said to me, and I married well, we can always, sell our house and go live in this area and earn money this way or that way. And I didn't always believe him. He has more of that mindset than me, but I think pick your partner well. If you can, pick your partners well, people who help you move through the low moments and anxiety. One foot in front of the other some days. Like when it's hard and you're not feeling the inspiration, just wake up and put one foot in front of the other and wait for the magic to show up. And when it does, grab it.
That was so good. Kara, thank you. Thank you for coming to the show. Thank you for sharing all of this. Thank you for what you're doing. And this is just beautiful. Thank you.
Ilana, thank you for having me on. This was fun. This was terrific. So I really appreciate being here.
More episodes that you're going to love are right around the corner. So definitely make sure to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, who in your life should see this today? Do share this with them. This will inspire and help those you care about and helps us continue to bring amazing guests. And I will see you there.